Hello guys, today's video will be extremely interesting. I plan to cover something which will be pretty near and dear to anybody who has been playing chess for some time. So this is about converting your advantages. So today we'll provide you some tips and tricks in order to help you convert your winning advantages into winning games, right? So let's get started without further ado. So this is a position out of Queen's Gambit declined. So you must have seen this opening quite sometimes in my videos. So I grab the center. The opponent is already pretty cramped. The computer is giving me plus 2.3 advantage straight away, right? So this is where our first tip comes in. So first tip of the day is simple. Don't be lazy. Keep calculating. So this is very important in my opinion. That even when you are positionally up, you are materially up, you keep calculating with the same amount of intensity. Here, opponent played a weak move f6, right? So this is critical. This is the first critical point, right? So once he plays this pawn up, this pawn becomes extremely weak, right? And my rook here directly sees this pawn. I went ahead and chopped this pawn off. He took with his knight, which gave me the opportunity to land my rook right there. So I am a pawn up right away. So now I have considerable amount of positional advantage as well as a little bit of a material advantage as well. So my opponent takes. This again, I take with my knight. This is also a little counterintuitive. You would typically think that don't want to have isolated pawns. We want your pawns to be together, especially on the center of the board where it can be easily attacked. However, I played my knight here because I wanted to control this square with both my knights. So because I think this square is a good jump square for my knight, which enables my bishop to open up as well. This is the level of calculation that you should typically do even if you are positionally up in a certain game. So my opponent retreats his bishop. He does not want to exchange his bishop for my knight. And I go ahead with my plan to put my knight on this critical square. So now, if you see, these two pieces are attacking this pawn here, right? So I'm threatening to win another pawn. Also, this bishop is a little weak, right? My queen can come here with discoveries to the king. So his position is completely lost, but you still need to keep analyzing and keep calculating. So he takes my knight, so I take back with my knight, and now this pawn is being attacked by 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. This pawn is a goner. So he blocks with his knight, but that doesn't stop me from taking this pawn off. So he takes my knight with his bishop. I take back with my rook, and then basically at this point in time, I'm 2 pawns up. Queen to d7, normal looking move, probably wanting double up on this file, attacking one weak pawn that I have or the center of the board. Again, you need to keep calculating. So I push my queen up and pin this knight to this queen. So he needs to defend this knight somehow. And I thought the most natural moves were putting the rook somewhere here. Maybe not this rook because this rook is much more active than this one. So he might want to move this rook here. But he played a very strange move. He played this. He played rook to f5, which allowed me one simple tactic. You guys can pause your videos and try to find out that tactic. For those who could do it, congratulations. This is the tactic. This skewers your rook with your queen. So the other rook comes back to protect this. I take the rook, and he takes back with his queen, and now putting pressure on my f2 square. Of course, he has to find attacks on my king because he's positionally down, right? So it's very typical for opponents to play more aggressively and wanting to complexify the position if they are materially down. At this point in time, I am a couple of pawns and an exchange up. So I have a significant material advantage. So now I make an easy looking move. I just bring my queen back to protect the f2 square. But this has a little bit of a hidden, threat attached to it. Pause your video to find out what that hidden threat might be. So that brings up to the next step of the day, which is to exchange of the queens. That is the most active piece that your opponent has. Why not try to exchange that queens off? The idea that I was talking about was to play queen up, threaten the check, threaten the queen, and exchange the queen off, right? So my opponent spotted that, moved his king out of the way. And now we come to the next step of the day, which is develop your idle pieces. The more pieces you bring on into the game, the more your material advantage starts showing, right? If you're materially up, but you're only playing with two of your five pieces, that material advantage will not show unless and until you develop all your remaining pieces. So that's why I took this opportunity to develop my bishop. So he plays bishop to g5. This is an opportunity to implement tip number 2, which is exchange pieces off. Wherever you get opportunities to exchange pieces off, you should. Continuing on that theme, queen to e5. This threatens to exchange the queen off, and if he tries to avoid exchanging the queens off, I will win the knight here. So my opponent plays queen to d2, threatening to take on f2 if I take the knight here. So this looks very scary, right? But again, you need to keep calculating. Tip number 1. So if I take here and he takes here, I can simply push my king out, and my opponent does not have any more threats. He can give me a check here, but then I'll just take here. He takes with his rook. I just escape with my king. There is nothing that my opponent can do. What my opponent does here is move the queen out. Now the threat is a little more pertinent. If I play a lazy move like this here, he wants to play this, rook to f1. I take the rook. I am forced to take the rook, and this is checkmate. Of course, I see that. I bring my queen back, and now I bring my queen back, offering another queen exchange, but my opponent rejects that queen exchange proposal, of course. And now, moving on to tip number 4, that is to get your rooks aligned. So the rooks are now protecting each other, also controlling this really great open file. And if my opponent thinks that this pawn is free and he wants to take this off, I will move my rook up, exchange one of the rooks, and make it even more difficult for the opponent to think about winning or drawing this position. So my opponent here plays f6, creating a little bit of a room for the king to move out. And I was not willing to give away any free pawns. So I just pushed this pawn out. Now the queen can't take this pawn. My opponent plays king to h7, and I was kind of tempted to play the check here. But there is something to keep in mind, which is our next tip, which is checking for converging squares. What do I mean by converging squares? So right now, my opponent has two pieces, two pertinent pieces. Where are they converging? Right? So this is a point that they're converging, and this is another point that they're converging. So these two squares here, which are the f1 and the c8 squares, are the squares where the opponent has the most power, right? And you need to be a little aware when you want to land your pieces here, or you want to move away your pieces from controlling these squares, right? So if I play something like this, is a pertinent threat of something like this, exchange, and this, right, on the f1 square, which I did not want to allow. Therefore, I did not move my queen out of this f1 square. I did not want to make a silly mistake at this point in time. So what I did is the final tip of the day, and that is to push your passers. Passers or passed pawns are nothing but pawns which don't have any opponent pawn in front of it which can threaten its movement. So if you want to stop these pawns, you have to invest one of your major or minor pieces to attack this pawn or attack the square that the pawn is moving to, right? This small pawn move creates an immense threat in the opponent's mind because this pawn can eventually become a queen, right? So immediately you will see that your opponent tries to attack this pawn. But this gives me the opportunity that I was looking for. Tip number two, exchange your queen. Now the queen exchange, you can't save yourself from the queen exchange. It will happen because the queen and the king are on the same line. So you have to take my queen, I take back, and now this is completely winning. I am a pawn up as well as a rook up. So there is no way my opponent is going to win this. So at this point in time, my opponent resigned. So these are the 6 tips, guys. If you want to keep in mind, I think it will definitely improve your conversions. And if you improve your conversions, you will see an immense improvement in your ratings as well. So hope you like this content. Take care. Bye bye.